Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today, our guest is Jan-Uwe Pettke, who is a security expert. He is a principal consultant at the BWI, working on the field of risk management, and he speaks here in his personal capacity, not representing any particular organization or authority. Welcome, Jan-Uwe.
Thanks, Sergej, for inviting me.
Thank you so much that you found time for this conversation. And you write excessively about the strategies of the German armed forces and the challenges we face and the reforms we need. Actually, reforms is not what Germany is famous for. We talk a lot about reforms, but we are not the champions in implementing fast reforms. So can you explain what kind of reform is needed for the Germany's Bundeswehr and why we have still the army, which is, as even our Minister of Defense confirms, is not ready for a war?
Yeah, I mean, this is a quite complex question, and I think we should not only discuss the necessary changes for the armed forces or the Ministry of Defense. I mean, we need to consider more a whole of society approach regarding the future challenges in the field of security. And I mean, this means that we, in a wider sense, need to discuss topics like resilience, and also need to discuss how the different ministries, federal ministries, but also on the state level and the municipality level can act jointly in order to tackle the challenges ahead. Because, I mean, currently we see not a war going on, but China and Russia are challenging us through hybrid threats. So they are using a variety of tools in order to challenge us on an economic scale. They conduct espionage, they conduct sabotage acts all over Europe. So these are the things which need to be considered when we talk about security in a wider sense. But of course, we also need to particularly have a look at the German Federal Armed Forces. And there, from my personal point of view, we need to start discussing how the armed forces should look like, should be shaped in order to deal with the military challenges ahead. So, from my personal point of view, we need to discuss the reintroduction of conscription. I mean, this topic is ongoing. The Minister of Defense mentioned this topic quite regularly. Also, the General Inspector also was mentioning this topic quite often. So there are some high-ranking political decision makers who are talking about this topic, but as we have read quite recently, there are also some leading politicians, particularly from the current government, like the finance minister or the chancellor himself, who were of the opinion that a conscription is not necessary, so we can go on with the armed forces like they currently are. I have, like I said, my serious doubts, and I mean, the most important aspect with regard to this question of conscription is the question, what happens if we are, for whatever reason, struck in a war with a peer competitor, which might last for a longer period. I mean, we see with the Ukraine is now involved in a war defending itself against Russia for about 2.5 years. So what happens if Germany and the European NATO countries would be involved in such a conflict? I mean, we will see a lot of wounded and dead soldiers. So these wounded and dead soldiers need to be replaced. And this is currently not possible with armed forces like we have it currently with 2 or in the future with 3 divisions. I mean, they will be not able to, execute their tasks after several months because too many soldiers have been wounded or are dead. So this is something we need to discuss. And therefore my personal opinion is that we need to honestly discuss publicly about the challenges ahead and find appropriate solutions.
If we go like a couple of steps back to get a broader perspective of what has happened to Germany's army, during the Cold War era, Bundeswehr was much stronger, with more conscripts, with more soldiers, with much more tanks, with much more equipment. Like we had, if I'm not mistaken, over 1,000 of tanks ready for the battle. Now we have how many? Like several dozens of them. And we had like a smaller population back then, but a highly militarized economy, despite all the commitment through the NATO, despite all the international armed forces which have been stationed in Germany, France, United States, United Kingdom, and some points of history, also Belgian or the Dutch forces, which helped us to protect our skies with air defense. So now we do not have conscription. Our armed forces in a far smaller shape. They don't have enough arms, even for the current perspective, as our minister says. And they are underfinanced despite all the promises from the chancellor. So is the conscription the key to this problem? Because when you conscript a lot of people, you need to bring them into a sort of structure. You need to give them equipment, you need to give them officers, you need to give them sergeants, and you cannot like form a new division or brigade out of nothing. You add conscripts to already existing structure, but we don't have this structure. So is the conscription the key to the problem which we have?
I mean, it won't be the solution for the time being. So, I mean, what we would need is a phased plan. So, starting to think about what should be the final end state of the armed forces. And from this final end state, we need to define steps in between how we want to achieve this defense goal. And I think this is would be the solution. So I totally agree. We won't be able to establish a conscriptionary army within the next 2 or 3 years. It will take much longer. But if we do not start today, I mean, we won't achieve it anyway. So I think it's very important really starting the discussion now in order to be soon able to make political decisions. And I mean, currently, I don't see exactly this happening. So there are too many politicians still avoiding this discussion. And surprisingly, I mean, everyone is telling you that conscription is no solution or is not feasible or this and that. But surprisingly, there is no alternative plan. I mean, there are like the Minister of Defense or General Breuer. There are people who are saying we need conscription, but the others don't give any suggestion how an alternative plan except the conscription could look like. I mean, they are saying, we could use a professional army. We might give the soldiers a little bit higher salary, so we could then deal with the current crisis of the personnel, because I mean we lack currently 20,000 soldiers of the armed forces. These are around about 10% of the total armed forces, or at least the positions are not filled with soldiers, but I also doubt this. I mean, of course, the conscription cannot be a solution in the first place for dealing with personnel crisis of the armed forces. But I mean, this could also be a positive side effect in the long run. But the only argument for reintroducing conscription should be the military need because of any alternative. And currently, like I said, I'm of the opinion that the only solution in the long run for dealing with the threats ahead is a conscription.
That means that Germany will need to deeply rethink its stand towards its army, Bundeswehr, and the level of threats which we are facing. And before we go deeper into details, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel if you have a friend of yours who you think needs to watch this interview and listen to the insights by Jan-Uwe Pettke. Feel free to share this link, send this link, but first of all, subscribe, like, and share this channel in general. So Jan-Uwe, we have already talked about this dilemma of having a conscript army, having a larger army during the peacetime. But we know that Germany all the time, all the decades, last decades, after practically the fall of the Berlin Wall, believed that we have entered a time of eternal peace. We don't need army. Army is just something which gets your money, gets your time, and brings nothing except of militarism, which is a very bad word in Germany. So that's why Bundeswehr was always seen as something we better get rid of. Now, does the German society, I do not speak about the Minister of Finance or Minister of Defense, they have their own interests and fears, but does the German society understand the need of the stronger, larger army?
Personally, I have the perception that the society is currently changing its mind. So if you have a look at latest polls, they say that about 52% of the German population are in favor of reintroducing conscription and 44% are against it. So, like I said in the beginning, the 44% who say, no, I do not want to reintroduce conscription, they do not suggest any plans what could be constructive alternative. So, like I said, I have the impression that the times are changing. And, well, the thing is that the politicians, they should, at least from my personal point of view, more advocate for the reintroduction of a conscription. Like I said, there are currently not many politicians who clearly are in favor of the reintroduction of a conscription. I recently read that the Christian Democratic Party is or had rewritten their political program, and there they clearly stated that they want to reintroduce conscription. But similar statements I haven't read from the liberals, from the Social Democrats or the Greens. So also these parties should, more clearly discuss the need for reintroducing conscription, or if they are against the reintroduction of a conscription, they should clearly explain how an alternative would work, or at least they are of the opinion how an alternative could work.
Any army, it can be large and well equipped. It needs a strategy. We need to understand who is our enemy, what are the wars we are preparing for, and how do we intend to win these wars. You cannot just fight a war, because if you just fight a war, you will lose after all, because you don't have a goal. You don't understand what is important, what is unimportant in this war. What is Germany's military strategy for the next decade? Does it exist? And how should the German army be prepared technologically for this new war?
This is an ongoing discussion. From my personal point of view, the current situation in Ukraine started exactly this discussion. So how should the future armed forces look like? What role will unmanned systems play? I mean, we see in Ukraine that on the one hand, Russia, but also Ukraine are using a lot of unmanned aerial vehicles, and they are also experimenting with other kind of unmanned systems. The Ukraine has been very successful in using unmanned surface vessels in order to attack Russian warships in the Black Sea. Like I said, very, very successful. So with only a small amount of money, they were able to inflict tremendous damage to the Russian fleet of the Black Sea. So I think we did not achieve any final solution on the shape or the technology stack of the future armed forces. But yeah, I mean, this should also be part of the wider discussion how we want to shape the armed forces. And do we have a military strategy? Of course, we have recently published, or the German government has recently published, the national security strategy. Of course, this is to some extent a strategy, but from my personal point of view, it is quite generic. Now we need to see or need to discuss, the different federal ministries need to discuss how they want to realize this strategy. A lot of things going on. I'm not entirely sure really if this current national security strategy will last for very long. I mean, we are still waiting for a national cybersecurity strategy, which should have been published this summer, but was postponed. Or no, I think even last summer was the idea to publish it. What was also postponed. So a lot of things are in the flow. We recently, or the German government recently published a strategy regarding security and the climate change. This is, from my personal point of view, a quite good development. But yeah, I think what is really missing is a general strategy how to deal with the volatile times we are living in. So currently, the majority of politicians, at least to my perception, have not really understood or are willing to accept that we need to act much more swiftly with regard to changes we are facing every time. So if you take the example of the Russian attack on Ukraine, from my personal point of view, the reaction of the German government was quite slow. I mean, it was quite impressive that the Chancellor held his speech regarding the Zeitenwende 3 days after the initial attack. But afterwards, I mean, the reactions were quite slowly. If you, for instance, take the suggestion of the former Minister of Defense, Ms. Lambrecht, that she wanted, was suggesting to send 5,000 helmets as a support to Ukraine. This was ridiculous, and if you consider how much time it took the German government or the parliament to decide on the delivery of other weapon systems like the Gepard or Patriot systems, or then later the infantry fighting vehicle Marder or the main battle tank Leopard 2, so also Leopard 1. But I mean, all these decisions, they took by far too long, and I think I'm of the opinion that we will face similar delays in future crises if we do not prepare the government and the parliament prepare itself in advance of such developments.
And Taurus missiles are still not in the discussion. And there came like a lot of statements from the government that they will not be delivered. All the reasons which have been mentioned, they don't hold like any serious questioning. And some of them are factually false. Some of them are politically strange, at least to say. But if we go like into this planning of the next defense of our democracy, we have seen that the Russian war against Ukraine has came as a surprise for many in the West, because nobody believed that something like tank battles or artillery barrage or trench warfare is possible in Europe. Like, we were expecting more the development of like cyber attacks or special forces raids, which also took place, but not to the extent and to share as we thought. Now, when we are talking about buying more tanks, buying more jets, buying more artillery units, I don't know if they will be purchased after all, because in Germany, politicians talk much more than they do. But even if we have them, can it be the case that we will not be able to use them because the next war which Russia or China or other actors will unleash against us will be once again different, with usage of sabotage groups, with blackmailing, with like some undercover operations using some unidentified actors like radical movements or other threats?
So I really doubt that the character of war has changed dramatically. I mean, like you also said some minutes ago, a lot of people were thinking about the end of history and the end of war fighting. I think all these ideas are, well, not substantial. So we do not have any proof or any indication that tremendous change has happened. So I totally believe that future war in Europe, if it happens, I mean, this is all speculation and we do not really know what will happen in the future. But like you said, if something like this would happen, I have the impression that it will, well, be similar to the current developments in Ukraine. But on the other hand, of course, I mean, one significant change in the warfighting is, of course, the aspect of cyber. So we probably will see that, well, various threat actors will, of course, use the cyber domain to, well, attack the NATO and its member states on or in this new dimension, in this new domain. This will, of course, happen, and it will also have an effect on the civil society, because, I mean, we probably talk then about critical infrastructure, so water supply, electricity supplies, all these things. So from my personal point of view, yes, this will be different to maybe past wars we have seen. And I'm not entirely sure if we are already prepared. I mean, if you listen to General Nakasone, who was the director of the NSA and in parallel also the commander of the US Cyber Command, said that we haven't seen too many incidents in Ukraine, not because the Russians haven't tried, but the Ukraine have been so resilient. And one reason for the resilience of the Ukraine in the cyber domain was that they had massive support from the US. I mean, on the one hand, from the Cyber Command, but also from Google, from Microsoft, and so on and so forth. But this was a single, or is a war in a single country. What would happen if we really face a conflict with NATO and some other nations? So these concentration of resources, one country, would not be possible anymore. So I have the impression that cyber means would be much more effective in a future conflict. I mean, the European Union is trying to solve this issue with the Cyber Resiliency Act, which is in the making, which also, well, wants to establish some kind of a civilian cyber reserve to tackle large-scale cyber incidents. This could be one part of the solution. But all in all, what is also quite interesting, and this not only happened in Ukraine, but also in Israel, the different conflict parties were able to mobilize various threat actor groups, cyber threat actor groups, in order to conduct, well, cyber attacks on the opposing party, mainly DDoS attacks, but also attacks like web page defacements or some hacking, some cyber espionage. So far as I understood these developments, the attacks have not been very sophisticated and that successful, but it nevertheless shows that there will be also some developments in the field of mobilizing civilian threat actors. And this will also, from my personal point of view, will have a negative impact on the situation within the cyber domain.
Regarding these new technologies, we have seen, and you have mentioned already, the significant increase of the role of drones on the battlefield, both kamikaze drones, surveillance drones, bomber drones, and also naval drones. Like the Ukrainians have practically pushed the Russian Navy back to the eastern harbors of the Black Sea or even to the Caspian Sea with their drones. Ukraine has created a separate unmanned vehicles corps as a separate type of forces, in addition to Air Force, Land Force, Navy. They have also now drones corps. In Germany, there was a legal attempt by the oppositional Christian Democratic Union to urge the creation of such separate drones corps within the Bundeswehr. This attempt was failed by the no vote from the ruling coalition. It's not only this creation of a separate corps, it's a general German mistrust to unmanned vehicles and to this long range application of lethal force. We remember how Germany was practically deprived of its own drone, winged drone, an analog of Global Hawk, when the German authorities has just banned test flights of these drones some 15 years ago. And we know all this debate when drones were declared as an inhumane, evil weapon, creating this moral distance between the soldier and the enemy. And the general idea is that the drones practically increase the number of civilian casualties, which is sometimes true, but not in a mass warfare when you have massive soldiers fighting each other in a trench warfare. Can we say that German perception of drones and other unmanned vehicles and new technologies, including the AI, has changed? Or is it still that naive pacifist approach, like we don't want modern arms because modern arms are more efficient in killing?
Well, I wouldn't put it that way. It's also not about a naive attitude of the Germans. I think for a long time, like you already have said, the Germans were not willing to, well, think much about war fighting, and how to, which weapon systems to use. So this was a discussion for a very long time neglected. And the example you mentioned about the unwillingness of Germans to buy or to use, to acquire UAVs was also heavily influenced by the US way of using drones, particularly in the Middle East and Afghanistan, for killing militant leaders with, at least to my understanding, a quite high number of collateral damages. And all in all, the efficiency of such precision strikes, how they call them, is quite questionable. So, I mean, this was the past environment where many of these discussions happened. Now, with the war in Ukraine, things are changing. Personally, I have the impression that also the discussion here in Germany gets more mature. But of course, there are some things mixed up. So, I mean, if you talk about unmanned systems, normally they are still steered and controlled by a human being. So normally there is an operator on the ground. But these discussions about unmanned systems often get confused intentionally or unintentionally by discussions on lethal autonomous weapon systems. So weapon systems which can kill military equipment or human beings without any human influence or control. I mean, we have loitering ammunitions already, which are going into this direction. So these are autonomous ammunitions which can strike against armored vehicles, battle tanks, and so on and so forth. So yes, I think it's the same like with the discussion about the conscription. I mean, we need here a more detailed discussion about the benefits and the disadvantages of these weapon systems. And of course, we also need to discuss how to maybe control them. I think this is a very, very important aspect. But yeah, I think exactly these discussions are evolving. But from my personal point of view, we need a more fact-based discussion about all these things. Often they are very emotional. I mean, I totally understand that such discussions on weapon systems, yeah, are not in favor of many people. But nevertheless, I mean, the situation requires that we start in Germany also discussing these things more openly.
But indeed, the discussion seems to be highly loaded with emotions. We use practically more or less autonomous weapons since decades. If you look at any cruise missile, it has its warhead, which can identify target. Cruise missiles can even cooperate with each other, finding the best strategy in attack. We have the defense systems like Phalanx on the naval vessels, which can identify target and engage it. We have landmines, like anti-personnel landmines are banned by Ottawa Convention, which Germany is a party of. But we produce anti-vehicle landmines, and some anti-vehicle landmines are pretty clever. They can identify targets, they can ignite when they believe it's a tank, not another object. They can even count how many tanks or other vehicles have passed over their head or like through the road. That is the German anti-tank mine, which fires a cumulative projectile against a vehicle. It can count the number of vehicles which have passed by and even disengage itself, like after, let me say, 1 month. So they are clear weapons. They can understand when it is the right moment to strike. So, of course, when a drone is just hovering over your head and identify you as a target, it is the next step technologically. But it is not something which is absolutely new. But I think that the problem is that emotionally, we think that all the weapons before they need to be ignited, like launched or fired by a human being or installed by a human being. And the drones, they have like a larger field where they fly, how they look at things. They need to take more decisions than, let me say, a landmine. That makes people scared. Oh, what will happen? Who will control it after all?
To some extent, you're right. I mean, but still, these are not really autonomous systems. So they have a very, very limited scope, and they have, their sensors are also very limited capacities. So I totally think that the systems you mentioned, they are of a completely different quality if we really discuss um, lethal autonomous weapon systems. And this is what many people have in mind. At least this is my perception when they discuss autonomous or unmanned systems. So, like I said, it is very important to discuss, like you said, what kind of weapon systems do we already have, and that there is also, like you rightly said, there is some degree of autonomy within these weapon systems, and what could be, well, future developments, what could be improvements. Are these really improvements? There need to be a clear discussion about this. But like I said, we should be more fact based on this, and also clearly say that the past systems are not that autonomous. They have a very limited, normally a very limited range. So if you talk about these anti-tank mines, I think it was 100, 150 meters. I doubt that anyone is expecting something bad happening from these systems. But the perception or the emotions about autonomous systems is real autonomous systems, particular flying systems, is something completely different. And I mean, there were quite some spooky or thrilling videos showing, I mean, fake videos showing autonomous swarms of mini drones killing human beings. And these videos were also having, from my personal point of view, a not very positive impact on the discussion, because they were framing the idea of autonomous systems in a very negative way. Of course, we need to be cautious without any doubt, but if we do not really discuss the advantages and disadvantages, I have the opinion that we won't be able, to use these things in a positive way. And on the other hand, I mean, we need also to, clearly monitor what other nations are doing, in particular in this regard, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So if they develop such systems, I think we also need to understand the way they function.
Now, what about the readiness of our economy and of our military sector for a large-scale war on a very basic level, like production of shells, production of missiles? We know that it is impossible for the arms producers to produce weapons in advance, just holding them on storage in the hope that one day the order will come from the government and they will say, I need 100 Leopard 2 tanks. Do you have them in your warehouse? Just sell it to me. So that's not possible. You need first to get an order from the authority and then you start production. But when we look at the current situation, how much can we scale up the production of the weapons which we have already developed, classic weapons? First of all, interceptor missiles. We know that Ukraine has suffered a lot from the fact that one day they just run out of interceptor missiles.
Yeah, so regarding the capacity or possibility to scale up production, I think we saw some quite impressive examples by Rheinmetall. I mean, they developed a completely new production line for 35 millimeter ammunition for the Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft gun within half a year. So this clearly shows how fast the German industry can adapt to the changed situation. I'm personally of the opinion that also other companies could adapt much faster to the situation than the politicians. So, I mean, if you take MBDA, one of the companies producing the Taurus cruise missile, the chancellor and other social democratic politicians said that if we give all these Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine, we won't be able to reproduce them. And then immediately, some days later, the CEO of MBDA said, oh, no. If you need Taurus cruise missiles, we are able to produce them. So I think these two examples clearly show that if the German government or the politicians in general are willing to give these orders to the industry, they will be capable of doing this. But what the industry really needs is a perspective. So they need a long-term planning. So if they want to increase or invest in production lines for vehicles, for ammunition, this and that, they need a clear perspective for the next, 2 or 3 decades, that the German but also the European governments will procure these systems. And I think we lost 2 years because of the lack of any political decisions in this regard. And like I said, I think the industry, they will need time to adapt, but they would be much faster than other stakeholders.
What about the cooperation between different countries within the NATO and within the EU? Or I need to say about the competition between these countries. We know that France and Germany still could not find a common solution of how to find a compromise between economic interests of their military producers. And some countries like Poland, like looking at how long it takes Germany to provide permission with delivering of its equipment, they said, okay, we buy our tanks and our artillery from South Korea and also buy our jets from the United States. We don't need German equipment, despite the fact that it's a good equipment. It's pretty good, and Ukrainians are happy with that. But the political limitations are so uncomfortable that we better avoid it. What is the way out of this dilemma? How can we unite the production and development capacities of every single member of the alliance in order to make the whole alliance stronger?
Well, it will take time, like the whole discussion about war readiness in Europe, and also the whole armament process needs to be discussed. I mean, here in Germany, we are discussing this armament on the purchasing processes for the armed forces for 2 decades now. So, I mean, this will also take time in Europe for the European Union as well as for the European NATO members. But I think there are possibilities to reach a common understanding. I mean, we have it with the future ground combat system, so the future main battle tank of Germany and France. Some important agreements were reached, I think, 2 weeks ago. And I think this is also the same with the future jet the France and Germany are planning. So there are decisions agreements ongoing. And on the other hand, I mean, we saw recently that with the Panther main battle tank, Rheinmetall was also showing that it can produce such systems or design such systems completely on their own. They recently built up a new plant in Hungary for the KF-51 Lynx, so the infantry fighting vehicle. This will be produced there, and the design will be finalized jointly with the Hungarian government or the Hungarian armed forces. So there are plenty good initiatives. The Boxer, so another wheeled platform, is also quite successful. There are many user nations already within Europe and the NATO. Australia bought it, but I mean, totally agree. I think in order to avoid such a patchwork of military systems like it's currently happening in Ukraine, we should decide on selected number of platforms within Europe so that each and every nation could, if necessary, exchange military systems like main battle tanks or infantry fighting vehicles between each other without so many logistically or technical challenges or hurdles. So yeah, of course, a lot to do, but there are possibilities. But it was mainly a question of political decisions on all sides. So it's not only about the German governments. I mean, you mentioned France, but there are also more governments than only Germany and France in Europe, and they also have to participate or to agree on such decisions.
Indeed, a lot of work is to be done, and the challenges will not disappear. The threats will only increase. We will face more enemies, more reckless enemies, and as long as it takes us to prepare for the next conflict or a war, to protect our democracy, to defend our way of life, the stronger will our enemies grow. That's why it's time to act now and to think really focused on how do we protect ourselves, how do we strengthen our democracies. It was an interview with Jan-Uwe Pettke, who is a security expert, a principal consultant at the BWI. He focuses on the field of risk management, and he spoke today on his personal capacity, not representing any particular organization or authority. Thank you, Jan-Uwe, for this interview.
Thank you, Sergej, for having me.
And don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel, and stay strong, stay with Ukraine.